I used to believe that marriages don't break because of big events, but because of small sentences spoken by the wrong people at the wrong time. At that time, I didn't know one careless comment would slowly poison everything my wife and I had built together. We were not perfect, but we were stable. Or at least I thought we were. Trust existed quietly between us, not loudly expressed, but steady enough to feel permanent. I worked in silence. My days were long, my efforts invisible to anyone who judged success only by loud achievements. I wasn't the kind of man who talked about work at dinner or complained about exhaustion. I believed responsibility didn't need applause. My wife knew I worked, or at least she never questioned it before. We paid our bills, saved slowly, and dreamed cautiously. There was no luxury, but there was peace. My aunt, however, never believed in quiet lives. She was outspoken, sharp-tongued, and admired for speaking the truth, even when that truth cut too deeply. People respected her opinions because she said what others wouldn't. My wife admired her confidence, her social power, the way she commanded attention without hesitation. I never imagined that admiration would one day work against me. One afternoon, during a casual family conversation, my aunt leaned toward my wife with a tone that sounded concerned, almost caring. She said it lightly, as if stating an obvious fact. "You know, your husband doesn't really work." There was no insult in her voice, no accusation, just certainty, as if she was revealing something my wife had been too blind to see. My wife laughed at first. A short, awkward laugh meant to dismiss the comment. But laughter doesn't erase doubt. It only hides it. I noticed how her eyes shifted afterward, how she grew quiet for a moment too long. My aunt moved on to another topic, satisfied, unaware or unconcerned about the damage she had done. For her it was just a sentence. For my wife, it became a question that refused to leave. That night nothing was said. But something changed. My wife watched me differently, not with love or anger, but with calculation. She paid attention to my routine, my calls, my silence. The comfort she once had in my presence slowly turned into curiosity mixed with suspicion. I could feel it in the pauses between our conversations, in the way her replies shortened, in the absence of warmth that once came naturally. I didn't defend myself because I didn't know I was being judged. I didn't explain my work because I didn't think I needed to. I believed trust meant not having to prove your worth every day. But while I remained unaware, doubt settled into her mind, growing quietly, feeding on comparison and fear. By the end of that week, my wife no longer looked at me as the man she trusted, but as a question she needed answered. And the most dangerous thing about doubt is that it doesn't seek truth. It seeks validation. After that day, the change in my wife didn't come loudly. It came in small adjustments that were easy to miss but impossible to ignore once noticed. She stopped sharing her thoughts the way she used to. Questions replaced conversations. She asked about money more often, about where I was going, about why my work never seemed to show results the way other men's work did. None of it was aggressive, but all of it felt measured, as if she were collecting evidence for a conclusion she hadn't fully formed yet. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was just stressed or tired. I still believed trust was intact. I didn't realize that her silence wasn't peace anymore. It was distance. She spent more time on her phone, smiling at messages she never explained, turning the screen away when I walked past. When I asked if something was wrong, she said no too quickly, as if the answer had been rehearsed. Inside her, a quiet war was taking place. She wanted to believe in me, but my aunt's words had planted a comparison she couldn't unsee. She noticed other husbands, other lifestyles, other signs of visible success. Each comparison made her feel smaller, embarrassed, as though she had settled for less without realizing it. The doubt wasn't just about money anymore. It became about status, pride, and how she was seen by others. That's when he entered her life. Not dramatically, not intentionally. Just someone already there, someone familiar enough to feel safe. He listened when she spoke. He noticed her frustration, validated her feelings, and never questioned her worth. He spoke openly about his achievements, his plans, his ambition. Next to his confidence, my silence felt like absence. Their conversations started harmlessly. Complaints about work, about family, about life. But each conversation left her feeling lighter, understood in a way she hadn't felt in months. She told herself it was innocent because nothing physical had happened. But emotionally, she was already leaning toward him, already sharing parts of herself she no longer shared with me. I noticed the emotional gap growing wider. When I spoke, she listened politely, not attentively. When I touched her, she didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. There was guilt in her eyes, mixed with excitement she didn't fully understand. She had crossed a line without stepping outside the house. By the time she realized she was hiding conversations, deleting messages, and protecting someone else's presence in her life, it was already too late. Emotional loyalty had shifted. And without knowing it, she had begun justifying a betrayal she hadn't yet committed, convincing herself that it wasn't her fault, that doubt had pushed her there. What she didn't understand was that infidelity doesn't begin with a body. It begins the moment a heart looks for comfort. The line she told herself she would never cross didn't disappear all at once. It faded slowly, worn down by justification and emotional exhaustion. By the time she crossed it, it felt less like a decision and more like a surrender. She convinced herself that the marriage was already broken, that I was emotionally unavailable, that nothing she did could make things worse. In that moment of weakness, the emotional bond turned physical, and the guilt arrived only after it was done. I sensed the change immediately. There is a difference between emotional distance and emotional absence, and she was no longer present at all. Her touch felt empty, her words careful, her eyes burdened with something she was afraid to reveal. I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply watched. Silence has a way of exposing truths that arguments cannot. While she was losing herself in secrecy, I was carrying a truth of my own. My work had never been visible by design. I had taken on a quiet partnership, building something slowly so we could one day live without fear of debt or instability. I saved, invested, and sacrificed comfort for security. I never spoke about it because I believed results mattered more than promises. I didn't realize that my silence had left space for lies to grow. The truth surfaced in the most painful way. I confronted her calmly, not with anger, but with certainty. There was no denying it then. Her face collapsed under the weight of what she had done. Tears came quickly, followed by apologies that arrived too late. She spoke my aunt's name without being asked, admitting that everything had started with doubt planted by someone she trusted. When I revealed the reality of my work, she didn't respond with relief. She responded with regret. Understanding came only after betrayal, when it could no longer protect anything. She saw the damage clearly then, not just to our marriage, but to the man she had doubted without proof. My aunt's words were exposed for what they were, not concern but projection. Her own bitterness, her failed experiences, her need to feel superior had poisoned my wife's mind. But knowing the source of the lie didn't lessen the pain. The betrayal still belonged to my wife. By the end of that conversation, nothing was resolved. There was no dramatic decision, no instant forgiveness or separation. There was only silence heavy with consequence. Trust lay broken between us, not shattered in anger, but cracked slowly by doubt, secrecy, and a choice that could never be undone. The days that followed were heavier than the confrontation itself. When the truth is finally spoken, there is no more space for denial, only for consequences. The house felt unfamiliar, as if it no longer belonged to either of us. Conversations were reduced to necessity. Every silence carried the weight of what had been lost, and every shared space reminded us that trust doesn't return simply because the truth is known. My wife tried to repair what she had broken, but remorse is not the same as restoration. She apologized without excuses, not because she hoped to be forgiven, but because she finally understood the damage she had caused. She no longer blamed doubt or influence or emotional neglect. She accepted that she had chosen to believe someone else over her own marriage, and that choice had rewritten everything. The role my aunt played could no longer be ignored. Her words were not an accident. They came from a place of unresolved bitterness, a need to undermine what she could not maintain in her own life. When confronted, she dismissed the impact, calling it honesty, refusing responsibility. That refusal only confirmed how easily destruction can be disguised as advice. But by then, the damage had already served its purpose. I had to make a decision that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with dignity. Forgiveness was possible, but trust would never return to its original form. Love could exist again, but it would be different, cautious, reshaped by awareness. I chose distance not as punishment but as clarity. Some lessons require separation to be fully understood. My wife didn't beg or argue. She accepted the outcome quietly, carrying the weight of her actions without resistance. That acceptance was the only thing she did right at the end. She learned that regret does not erase betrayal, and loyalty once questioned cannot be restored by tears alone. Time created understanding but not repair. I continued my work, the same silent effort that had once been doubted. The difference was that I no longer needed anyone to believe in it. I had learned that the most dangerous betrayals don't come from strangers, but from doubt introduced by people we trust. In the end, the lesson was painfully simple. Infidelity doesn't begin with desire. It begins when a partner allows outside voices to replace faith. And once that faith is broken, no truth, no explanation, and no apology can return the marriage to what it once was.